All right, I think we're going to just get started as people continue to trickle in here. And hello, Virginia. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, and before I start the conversation we're going to have with Virginia today, I just want to welcome everybody as you're coming into this webinar, and to members of the League of Women Voters of Corvallis, to folks outside of Corvallis, those visiting for the first time that aren't members, thank you so much for joining us. And actually, I just thought it'd be good to know, because this invite went out throughout Oregon leagues, to see who's all here today. So first, let's just see if my answer, are you a league member? Yes, or I'm going to be, right? All right, I see the tally is coming in. Looks like we have almost everybody who is a league member, but those who aren't, those couple of people will be soon, I'm sure, just following up from today's webinar, right? Thank you for joining us. And also, let's just see who here is from different areas. Whether you're in Oregon, you might be calling in from different places. That's the power of Zoom, right? So we're gonna launch this. Are you here in Corvallis? Outside in Oregon somewhere? And I'll count Virginia for outside Oregon, even though I don't think panelists were able to vote on this one. Okay, this is great. We have definitely, you know, some deep roots here in Corvallis, but we also have people from around Oregon joining us, and also three or four people outside of Oregon. So thanks so much for coming, and happy to have you here with us today. Let's cancel out of that. And just before we begin again, just a couple of things. You're on a Zoom webinar today. I bet everybody is Zoom professionals at this point in time, right? This is the easiest one. You get to kick back, sit back, and not do really anything other than be able to hear this conversation today. It will also be recorded. It's being recorded right now, and we will have this available to view after today's event. Through the League website, we'll also post it on our Facebook page and other media. And I guess I should introduce myself. That's kind of not necessarily the best way to start off. My name is Jessica McDonald. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Corvallis. And you know, why do I love the League? Why do I love it? Right now, at the height of polarization, the height of division in our country, the League, for me, stands as a beacon for nonpartisanship, for community, for unity, focused on fighting for issues that affect every single one of us and that affect our entire democracy. The League of Women Voters, as I'm sure you're all aware, believes in a democracy where every single individual has the right, the knowledge, and the desire to participate. This means 100 years of advocating for voting rights for all. This means 100 years of advocacy and education about women's rights. And this means today, 100 years after we were formed, being committed to the battle for things like social justice, the environment, healthy communities, livable communities, housing for all. The League is a place where your voice can lead to action. I think that's one of the things I love so much about it. And there is a place for you at the League. If you are new to the League of Women Voters, again, welcome, and reach out. I'd love to talk to you if you're here in our community about opportunities to become involved, engaged, and an advocate within the League of Women Voters. It seems like we've been celebrating the 100th anniversary of the League and the 19th Amendment for about a year now. I remember last September at this same meeting that we hold in September, our kickoff meeting, I talked about this year ahead with the 100th anniversary and all of the hoopla that was going to come into it and the celebrations. And, you know, we've had a few pivots in that with COVID, but still we've had a year of celebrations and honoring generations of suffrage leaders who paved the way for us today. We have also shined a light on those whose voices were silenced throughout the suffrage movement and continue to be, particularly women of color whose suffrage leadership has been downplayed or erased entirely from history books, who would not see their own right to vote for decades, oftentimes after the passage of the 19th Amendment. This 100th anniversary really offers us an opportunity to look back and understand this past, but it also offers us this huge opportunity to look ahead. And that is where we are tonight, with our sets firmly set on the horizon. And we know that the road ahead of us is going to be an uphill one, right? Not only are we seeing all the work we've put into voter rights, we've seen voter suppression and challenges to our democracy every single day. But the League itself is having a moment of reckoning, really asking ourselves, how are we going to thrive? Not just be here, but thrive in the next century. The League and our entire movement is at this like pivot point, with our feet firmly placed in the past and these deep roots that we have. We are so well poised to embrace a new future. The League of Women Voters of Corvallis this year adopted a theme of transformation for the whole year in recognition of this moment of change. And who better to talk about and have a conversation about this change and this future than the CEO of League of Women Voters of the United States, Virginia Kase. This is one of those benefits of Zoom, right? We get to have somebody from the East Coast joining us. From the first moment I heard Virginia speak, I thought, like, she's got this, she's on it. She's inspiring me every day. Since 2018, Virginia has led our 100-year-old organization through a period of rapid transformation and growth, focused on building power by engaging in advocacy, legislation, expanded litigation, organizing efforts to ensure voting rights for all. Prior to working for the League, Virginia was at the forefront of the immigration rights movement as the CEO of Kase to help organize, advocate for, and expand opportunities for Latino and immigrant people, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia. And she's a mom. So thank you so much, Virginia, for being here tonight, and welcome to Corvallis.
Thank you. And I wish I could be there in person. I will say that I have always had a special place in my heart for the West Coast. It is one of the most beautiful places, and all up and down, there's nothing that isn't beautiful about the West Coast. And so I wish I could be there with you guys, but in person would have been way better, but this will have to do.
You'll have to do. I agree with you. I'm a little bit biased, but I do think that it is the most beautiful place here on the West Coast. So we'll welcome you with open arms next time you're in Oregon.
I'm going to hold you to it.
Okay. I also forgot to mention to all of you on the webinar, you're welcome to post a question in the Q&A box. And if we have time, we're really going to try to answer a couple of those questions at the end of this conversation. So please do that. And if you have any questions for Virginia, especially that you'd like to offer. So first, I'd like to start out, Virginia, by just saying, you know, we all have women who have come before us, inspired our own leadership, from family members to teachers, community members, neighbors. For me, there isn't just one, you know, sort of single person that stands out, but rather like this parade of women who showed by example how to lead with strength, humility, and open mind. And I would love to start out by just honoring somebody in your life who has inspired you. If you could tell us about that.
I think similar to you, there are so many women who have inspired me. One in particular, though, is my grandmother, who passed away on Christmas Day in 2018. She had 7 children she raised by herself. My grandfather passed away not long after World War II, and she had my youngest aunt. And she had to raise all 7 kids by herself at a time when it was hard. But she was so determined and she persevered. And even though she had nothing, literally sometimes going to the church to have enough food, she made sure that all of her kids got a Catholic school education. She was a devout Catholic, got their Catholic education, and they all were able to become successful in life. And that was really her working at the post office. We have this great conversation about the post office right now. The post office matters to me because that was what my grandmother did for her entire working life. And she retired with her pension from the post office. And so just the perseverance of somebody who can, I don't know how I would do it with 7 kids. I can't imagine how she did, right? So yeah, she's just one of my heroes.
Yeah, those people that are like the unsung heroes in our world.
It's those family members, right? Sometimes that you're just amazed at where you come from, and the people who have come before you have really paved the way for you to be able to have these different opportunities. And so she was somebody really special to me in my life.
Oh. And, what brought you into the League of Women Voters? Was it a specific topic? A lot of people come in because of one issue, right? Like there might be something that really pulls at their heartstrings that they're committed to personally. Or what was it for you? What was the open door to the League of Women Voters for you?
So it was interesting because living in Maryland, I had been working on immigrant rights. I had worked for a long time on state issues in the state that I lived in. And we had worked on passing the Maryland DREAM Act, which gave in-state tuition for undocumented students. And it went to referendum, and the death penalty and marriage equality all ended up on the ballot that year. And that was my first opportunity to work with the League. And so even though I wasn't working, I was working for an organization, and we all pulled together, and seeing the commitment that the League members had. And it was interesting because here we all are working in coalition, and the League members were probably the easiest people to work with, the most committed. And really, I remember the question going on about what the referendum question was going to be like and what it was going to look like. And the League was so critical in making sure that that language was easy to interpret for everyday people, so that voters, they really came with the lens of how are voters going to process this question and know how to vote on it the right way. And so that was my first real introduction into working with the League. And so when the opportunity came when they reached out to me about the position to be the CEO at the LWVUS, at first, I'll tell you, I was obviously honored, and there was a process that I had to go through. But I think it was this idea that everyday people can have an impact, that you didn't have to be somehow special or unique, that it was a place where you could come with all of the knowledge in the world or just a little bit and grow that knowledge, and the opportunity for knowledge exchange and growth. There are very few organizations that give you that. And the League was a place that does that. And that's just, there's not enough of that left these days. And so for me, it was just, like I said, an opportunity that I had to pursue to be able to see not only if this was an organization that I could really help continue to grow and build off of this 100-year foundation that already exists, but it was an honor for me to think of all of the incredible people who have come before me who have really done that work.
Has immigration rights is very close to my heart, and with that being the experience that led you right into the League, has that been an area, the cause and the impact area with working with League of Women Voters of the U.S. that you've felt you've been able to continue in this new role?
Yes, and so we've been able to really, especially, when I came on board in 2018, it's been in the midst of attack after attack after attack of the immigrant community, the xenophobia that exists in our country right now, the blaming that exists. It's an area where, fortunately, at LWVUS, we've been able to sign on to a lot of letters, support legislation, and do work that hopefully will have an impact. on the immigrant community in a favorable way. I think the thing that's sad for me is just the political situation and the gridlock that exists right now in the Senate in particular. I mean, the House is moving things right now. In the Senate, everything just kind of sits in the graveyard, as you know, the majority leader likes to call it. That's not me saying it, it's him. And so unfortunately, there are a lot of things that could have been done, I think, over the past 2 years that just haven't happened, unfortunately. But I'm hopeful. I always remain hopeful.
Always hopeful. So you talked about, this coming in 2018 to this position right before this momentous anniversary that we are now at sort of the tail end of, with this 100th anniversary, both for the League of Women Voters, but also for the ratification of the 19th Amendment. As you look to the next 100 years of the League, this is a big vision, but what is your hope for that next century of leadership vision?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the first 100 years for me was a down payment on the future. I think one of the things that I'm really proud of, especially in these past 2 years, is I've seen the League return to its activist roots. Now, I know that and so I think it's become a place over the past 2 years where we see more and more people finding ways to plug into the League in a way that is meaningful to them. I mean, let's face it, when I first got here, and I think for several years before, we had seen a decline in membership at the League. And I think there was, there were barriers, I think, that were in place for many people, and smart people before me, decided we need to build this transformation roadmap, really do a deep dive into ourselves, who we are, who we're trying to become as an organization, and figure out what those barriers are that exist. And so that was the transformation roadmap that many of you have already seen. It's been in existence since 2016, and it really focused on internal systems, updating technology, taking a look at diversity, equity, and inclusion within the League, and really figuring out what is it that we're not doing right? Why are we not being a welcoming space for all people? Because clearly our demographic was, kind of homogenous. There was very little diversity within the League. And so there have been real efforts since that time, and I've tried to continue that, to really work on creating a more inclusive and welcoming League by centering people of color, making sure that we are using a different lens, that DEI lens, in all of the work that we do. And then there was this other missing piece in the transformation roadmap that really wasn't spoken to a lot, and it was this section called Advancing a Strategic Focus. And so from 2018 until 2019, the board, in January of 2019 until January of 2020, the board of directors really spent time trying to focus on building out a new strategic framework for the organization. And it has 6 key goals that we're focusing on. The first is creating a more diverse, welcoming, and inclusive League. And that's just doing that deep dive, not only into, now that we know who we are and we know who we're becoming, we know that we want to be an organization that knows how to show up as strong allies and partners. We know we want to be an organization that is welcoming and inclusive. And in order to do that, there are just certain things that have to happen, these shifts. And so focusing on those things. The second is building organizational capacity at all levels of the League. It can't just be where we're building capacity at the national level, or there are some state leagues who are building capacity. We really need to make sure that we're building capacity so that all leagues are growing and thriving. And so there are some things that we're working on right now to be able to put those things in place. It means that, again, but we have to back it up with the work. Nobody's going to give us the money if we're not showing that we're doing great work. Which leads me to number 3, which is increasing our advocacy and our activism. A lot of times people were afraid, I think in the past, there was kind of this idea that we couldn't be activists. Some people didn't see themselves as activists. And the reality is that from our beginning, the League members have been activists. Not everybody explores or uses their activism the same way. some people are financial activists. They're not the person who's going to be at a rally or a march, but they're going to be the person who's going to make sure that the resources are there. Some people are activists by taking care of engaging in action alerts, right? Some people are activists. I mean, there's so many different ways that people can plug in, but we really want to build that so that everybody sees themselves as an activist in the organization. And those three goals really power our top line goals. There's kind of like the top line and the bottom line. One, 2, and 3 fuel 4, 5, and 6. 4, 5, and 6. So the fourth is making sure that we are really having an impact in the area of voter education and services. That is our core, that is our bread and butter. We are always going to be focused on making sure that voters have the information they need, not only to make an informed decision, but to be politically active in our democracy, to make good decisions, to be able to combat mis and disinformation, to know how to vote and how to combat voter suppression. The fifth is a focus around people-powered fair maps. We know that fair maps are, something that are hard to come by these days. We're always going to be involved in redistricting. The League has always been involved in redistricting. And so the idea around people-powered fair maps, after we lost that Supreme Court fight back in 2019, we realized we needed to do something really big. And that in order to really have fair maps across the country, this needed to be an all-in effort. National, state, local, everybody had to be in, but it also had to be across all of the states. And while we know some states already have a remedy, they need to be able to protect those gains, those wins, right, in this redistricting cycle. Some are going to have a really hard time being able to do that, but it doesn't mean that they can't focus on a federal legislative fix or being able to get the information out to their community members so that they're laying the foundation for the next redistricting cycle and demanding transparency while the maps are being made. And then there are others who maybe have a ballot initiative or they have a state legislative fix or other solutions that they can engage in. But it really is about being in community with one another as leagues and being able to provide opportunities to support other leagues, and also to do the work to make sure that community members are as engaged as possible in this process. And then the last is the campaign for making democracy work. And so we know that's probably been one of the hardest areas for us to focus on over the past few years. But the reality is we have a lot of issues, a lot of things that need to be fixed right now. We know and we've seen the impact of the Citizens United decision. We know the impact that money in politics has had on our elections and everything that has happened since that decision. So every area of the campaign for making democracy work is kind of that goal number 6. How are we figuring out what at each level of league we can do? So for example, there might be some local leagues right there in Corvallis. You guys might be able to have some kind of an initiative that will focus on some kind of a fix in your community, but that might not work in another local league in another state. But we're building the groundwork little by little by little. And at the national level, obviously, one of our big goals was to focus on HR1, for example, which obviously it's the For the People Act in the Senate that hasn't gone anywhere, but we're going to keep trying until we can get something through. And so these are all the things that we want to continue to focus on at the League. And then at convention, at things that you heard, such as immigration reform, fighting for health care, the Electoral College, all of those other issues, which are key.
That's a pretty awesome 6-step roadmap there for the League. And I really appreciate the interest in making sure that both at the local, the state, and the national level, that there is a strategy and support and capacity to be able to link up all of these different layers within the League, which at its, the sum is more than the total of all the parts, really. Like, we're able to do so much together as one unit in our separate local and state and national league. So I just really appreciate that and hearing that.
Yeah, I think one of the things when I came on board, it's always different when you're outside of an organization versus inside. And I'm a League member, And it's even funny for me because I sit at, I sit at my desk in the national office, and I was so shocked at how some of the resentments that existed. I mean, let's be real. I like to be transparent. And people would say, well, national. I'd be like, well, when was that? And they'll be like, well, in 1984. And I was like, I was in grade school. I don't know. I don't have anything to do with that. But we're really trying hard to make sure that all leagues feel valued. I wish there was a way to just hit the restart button sometimes. Because we're not perfect people, and I can't speak for boards or staff that came before us. I only know that the tone and direction that we're trying to set with the board that exists now and the team that exists now really is one that's inclusive. And we recognize that we have to work together. We take a lot of our cues, if not most or all, from local and state leagues, because the reality is that you guys are the heart and soul of this organization. We happen to be in close proximity to Capitol Hill and to kind of the epicenter of the power center of the country, but we have a responsibility to represent all of you. And so we're not making things up and just deciding this should be the agenda. It really is coming from the membership, and that's important. As somebody who started my career as an organizer, wrote on Facebook just this week, it dawned on me, it was 26 years ago this week that I started my first job as an organizer. And I just remember building a membership organization and door knocking and late night community meetings and dragging my kids around when they were little to meetings, and they'd be like, oh, do we have to go with the community again? Like my kids would be like, do we have to go to another community meeting and sit still? And, but I knew how important it was. And I know the importance of people powering everything that we do. And so that's really what I'm hoping we can get to a place across all levels of league where we can be gracious with one another and patient, and also honor the work that we all contribute, because it really is for this bigger goal of making sure that everybody has the ability to participate in our democracy in a meaningful way.
Yeah, so well said. As you talk about the strategy and the next steps and sort of what's ahead for the league at every level. And we think about transformation, both the transformation roadmap, but just more broadly, even like this culture of transformation at this moment, this special moment in the league. You've talked about some of those ways I think that the league is rising to the challenge to lead at this important time. Are there any ways that stand out to you as some of the biggest opportunities or challenges to lead in this time of transformation right now?
Absolutely. I think the conversation around partisanship is one that needs to continue to happen and revisit and revisit and revisit, because everybody has a different idea. Nobody's ever really been able to clearly define what it means to be nonpartisan in the league. And what I mean by that is, depending on what league you sit in, every league has kind of different criteria for what you can and can't do, or how you can and cannot engage. I know at the national level, what the board has decided was that we are not going to endorse or support candidates or political parties. Very clear, very cut and dry. But it doesn't mean that we don't have an opinion and that we don't have positions. We stand on the positions that exist, that the leagues that the membership votes on every 2 years for impact on issues. That is our guidebook for everything that we do. And so even, for example, right now with the Supreme Court nominations, the board had a really great discussion, and we've done a few webinars now trying to get the information out to membership on where the league stands. As most of you know, the Kavanaugh hearings 2 years ago, that was the first time that the league had ever opposed a judicial nominee. And there was a lot of controversy around that. And I was really proud of the board for the care they took. Whether people agree with the decision or not, there was a lot of care that was taken. And similar this time, there was a lot of decision making. Well, where do we stand on this? What does this mean? And we, I think, decided really fast that we shouldn't be opposing any candidate, because it's not about the candidate in this moment. It's very much about the process and consistency in process. And so at the national board said, no, 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 we can't have people taking advantage of political moments and changing up the rules just because it's advantageous to them right now. And so they stand very firm that because elections have already started, because voting has already started in many states, the Senate should not be able to move forward with a confirmation process. That is the position that they oppose. But again, there are some who may think across the league as a whole might say, well, I don't agree with that. That feels too partisan. And so again, I think one of the things that I do hope will happen in the coming biennium is that we will be able to really define that very clearly and get on the same page so that everybody was speaking with one voice.
Yeah, I definitely know that, I can just speak within our league, the challenge of partisanship and the question comes up, and it's something that we're so proud to be nonpartisan. It's such a core piece of our mission and our work. And yet when the issues themselves become over time partisan in a way, that becomes a question that we continue to have to address. And I think the idea of really confronting it, like you said, just talking straight at it and saying, what do we mean? What is our definition of partisanship and nonpartisanship is really important. And I think that it's one that maybe I'm excited to just kind of come back and have that conversation with my league.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And I think one of the other things is that going back to impact on issues, that is, like I said, that is the Bible for us every time we go back. And because the parties will take any of these issues, any one of the issues that we stand on, and they'll own it, depending on what's going on in the landscape in the country in that moment. And so depending on who has picked that up, that all of a sudden becomes owned by that party. But the reality is, and it was funny, I was talking to our attorney about this because we were trying to be able to make sure that we were giving folks good guidance. And that was the one thing that he said to us. He said, if it was anybody else in the world on some of these issues, I would say, stay away from it, close to an election or whatever. He said, but with the League of Women Voters, you are probably the only organization who has such organized positions and have held them for so long. He said that your positions outdate anything that the parties are trying to stand on. He said, so you're one of the few organizations that can stand there authentically and say you're truly nonpartisan, because many of these positions you've held for 50, 60, 70 years. And so it's not for us something that is new. We're not new to this. I think the other thing, though, that's going to be important for the league in the coming biennium, we talk about systemic change. We talk about what's happening with racial tensions in this country. We talk about wanting to be a diverse, equitable, and inclusive league. But at the end of the day, it also means that we have to be courageous, not only in looking in the mirror, but also how have we been perhaps in some ways complicit in perpetuating systemic racism and some systems of oppression that exist within this country. And so what we'll be doing over the next biennium is looking at all of those positions through a DEI lens. We're going to be forming a group of league members from throughout the country, local, state, and local and state leaders, to come together with key members of the board who can look at each of the positions through the DEI lens, just to make sure that we haven't inadvertently contributed to some kind of something systemically that actually isn't that great. We just never really looked at it through the right lens. And so we want to make sure that all of our positions are, that we can come back in this next biennium and make recommendations on any changes that we think would allow us to be able to stand more firmly in support and as allies with a variety of different communities. It's not just community colors, but we have the disability community. We have Native American and tribal communities. I mean, there are just so many different groups who have been marginalized, the LGBTQ community. And so how are we standing firm in our positions, making sure that even though they might have seemed great in that moment when we took it, it might have been done through a very singular lens, and things change over time.
So I was thinking about that these courageous conversations and how to have them. And within the league, you alluded to this earlier, but one thing that I've felt is, especially at this anniversary time, how and we're talking about transformation and this new horizon in front of us, and change. There's a lot of sensitivity that can come with that. Of, are we turning our backs on the past? Is there a feeling of sort of, breaking with the past and it's a whole new future? And I'm sure that plays out in different scenarios in every organization that is going through transformation and change, and really trying to understand how we can honor and celebrate everything that we have today, and all of the foundation and the leaders that have, and the voices that have brought us to where we are today, and also acknowledging these moments of change. And I don't know, just any thoughts on that? I'm sure that's a bigger question in general for you, and that you've been seeing play out in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, we've had these different conversations. For example, I've been asked a lot about Carrie Chapman Catt, and it was really hard for me to process some of the complexity around her, because here's this woman who, I mean, is our founder, and she was a shrewd political operative. She developed this winning plan. I mean, that woman was a political genius. Her strategy actually moved the 19th. It made it happen. I mean, I know Alice Paul gets a lot of credit for her activism, but at the end of the day, Carrie Catt was that person who was behind the scenes, who was moving the 19th. But then I go to National Archives, and there's this letter that's sitting there on display. I was there for, there's a suffrage exhibit. And in there, it's the letter she wrote by hand to Southern white Democrats, saying that white supremacy would be upheld in the South if they granted women the right to vote, because whites would then outnumber Blacks in the South. And it's sitting with that complexity is hard, because you don't know somebody's heart. You don't know if they in their heart were a racist, but she did engage in pandering to racists, and that letter in itself was a pretty racist document. So how do you reconcile that great political achievement with the tactics that she used and the levers that she pulled to get to the win? And so for me, it goes back to this question of how we operate today. Is by any means necessary the right way all the time if it leaves a bunch of other people behind, or if people aren't included? It's not like women of color, and it's not just, it's Black women, it's Latinas, it's Asian women. I mean, you name it. And let's not get into, I read this really interesting article about the queering of the suffrage movement, and how many of them, those women who were friends who lived together, were also queer, part of the LGBTQ community before that's what it was called. And so when I think about that, who got thrown under the bus and who got left behind, for me, those are the things that we have to grapple with, we have to discuss. And so we can't own somebody's behavior. What we can do as an organization, and what we must do, is acknowledge it and recognize that it doesn't mean that all white women in the suffrage movement were bad. To the contrary, we had a lot of people who started in the abolitionist movement who helped, which fed into the 19th Amendment, right? Which led to this. It doesn't mean that at all, but it does mean that some were, and some contributed to it in a way that was not going to benefit everybody, and they knew that. But we have to be able to sit in that complexity, and it can be both. I think there's sometimes you have to feel like you have to choose it. Yes, and it can be both things. And that's history. It's just the truth. We have to acknowledge it, sit with it, and figure out how do we learn lessons and apply those lessons to where we are today.
I love the both and, yes, and thinking as a part of transformation. And I think within the league, I didn't, just as you say that, I'm thinking that's a powerful culture change just within the league, who is so tied to, you know, process and the wonderful outcomes of research and study that we do. And there are some clear delineations of how we go forward, and it's built in a very structured way. And so I just think that idea of sitting with non-closure and both and thinking is a powerful just lesson for us, maybe in the league, of how we interweave that into our work. And as you're talking, I have a follow-up question. Just, you know, as we look to the future and are supporting emerging leaders, younger women, Black, Indigenous, people of color within the league, in that culture that you're describing of how we're continuing to build that, how do you see the league being best positioned right now to be able to give voice to these next generation of leaders?
Well, I think one of the things is holding space for people who have traditionally been marginalized. We have to be able to create that space and hold that there for them and listen. And I think that that's critically important. When we, and some people say it's impossible, or how do we do that? How do we go about becoming a more diverse league? I will say, when I came to the national office, there were 3 staff who were people of color when I got there. And I was like, you know, what's going on here? And as we've been able to build the staff and be able to grow, fortunately, you know, we've been able to do fundraising to work on PPFM or to for these elections. We are now basically 50% people of color, LGBTQ, trans community. I mean, we have people from all walks of life in the league, but we were intentional about our strategy. We wanted to make sure that we had the most qualified people, but we also made sure that we were being intentional about recruiting all over, not just, you know, throwing something up on Indeed and thinking, you know, whoever applies first. We really wanted to do outreach to HBCUs, to the Latinx community, to different places, being very intentional with our recruitment strategy so that we could have the most diverse pool of candidates. And I think likewise, when it comes to the leagues, and the other thing I would say is going into spaces where you might not be comfortable, is showing up as an ally, showing up in places and spaces that may be uncomfortable for us at first, for league members at first, if that's not a space that you traditionally come to or have been in or grown up in. So it's getting out of your own comfort zone and showing up, I think, as a good ally first. When you're able to do that and people see that effort and that intentionality, then they'll say, oh, okay, maybe I should reciprocate. Or, you know, it's built over time. It's not going to be an overnight snap your fingers all of a sudden. We're the most diverse organization. And I think, again, it's about holding space. It's not just about having bodies there for the sake of having bodies. It's about really creating space and giving power and voice and leadership to people from other backgrounds. I think that's critically important if we want to thrive and survive, because the league really doesn't have the right to exist if how can we say we're an organization that represents voters? Well, voters run the gamut. They're not a monolith and they're not homogenous. They're not all one group of people. And so how can we fulfill our mission as an organization if we aren't willing to do the things that are necessary to be representative of this country? And that means everybody in this country, even people we don't agree with. And that's why our nonpartisanship is so important.
Right. Well, I'm going to, I just got so wrapped up in this that I just looked at the time and my phone, and it looks like we have a few minutes left. I'm going to just see if there are some questions. It looks like there was a follow-up question in the chat box about your process with the positions. And I think that the individual is asking about, you know, being able to compensate people that are helping with the review of positions, especially with an EDI lens. And if there were any discussions on compensation for those individuals.
Compensation as far as financial compensation is concerned? Is that what we're talking about?
Compensated for their role in sorting through issues. Yes, financial, I believe.
So for positions, one of the things that's important is that they are league members, just because we want league members to be the people. So, and we do have a lot of people of color in the league. I do not want to act like, I mean, we have had so many new members who have come on board to our organization. And so I recognize that every league does not look the same. Typically league members are volunteer, but we do try to incentivize people when they are taking additional time to come to DC or to engage in a lot of time for that. But traditionally we don't do financial compensation with membership. It's usually, like I said, we like to call it incentives. So we like to give thank yous to folks, but not as on salary or anything like that.
There was a question in the Q&A from Tanya asking, well, tonight with the first presidential debate, is there any way that the league might come back to moderating presidential debates in the future?
This is the bane of my existence right now. I have got to tell you, I don't know who asked this question. Thank you. You know, we actually tried to partner with Cal State for one of the debates and the primary debates, just to dip our toes into the water, and with ABC television. It did not work out. We were not selected. But I will say that I don't know if you've ever seen the video that the president of the league at the time when we decided to stop doing the debates. And it's on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. Go and take a look at it. She had a press conference. It was like all in her, you know, 80s glory, or 90s glory, early 90s, with the hair and everything. And it was like one of those old fashioned press conferences at the National Press Club. So it's actually a funny video. It's like walking into a time warp. But she said, the League of Women Voters will not be a part of the hoodwinking of the American people. And when that decision was made by that board, I have to respect it. The reality is that both of the parties were trying to control the league debates to such an extent that we weren't even able to dictate what questions were going to be asked. And so if the league was to truly be able to moderate debates again, and we don't know with the, you know, presidential debate commissions and everything that exists, would they allow us to ask the questions that we want to ask? Would we be able to do the things that are authentic to us as a league, or would it be something that is just a cover to make the parties look good? And so I know it's a conversation, it's a question that comes up time and time again, and we would love to be able to do that, but we haven't been able to make any progress. And I don't know that they will let us, quite frankly. I think Senate debate, you know, debates on Senate races, congressional races, and all of the down ballot races that we do now are continue to be important. But the presidential, your guess is as good as mine, but we would love to.
Someday.
Someday. A girl could dream.
Yes. Well, and speaking of the debate, I know I promised everybody that you would be in front of your televisions watching that debate for Pacific time at 6 p.m. So I'm going to just thank you so much, Virginia, for joining us today. And I think one of my, it's hard to write when you're not looking at your paper. And so I've got all these notes, but they're like, you know, in another language sort of. But one of my biggest takeaways was early on, and you're talking about the power of the league and that every single individual can be an advocate and an activist, and how powerful that is, and how we need more of that in our lives. And the ability to really impact change at whatever level is so powerful, and it's something that you appreciate and that all of us are here because of that, I think, at the league. And so I just really appreciate you taking the time, inspired by your vision for the league and this, you know, roadmap that you've worked with the league to be able to lay out for all of us. And, you know, I also thank you for putting out these calls to action, you know, for all of us. So as we end tonight, I will extend a call to action to all of you here. And we're in a moment of change. We've talked about that tonight. a moment of new beginnings. And as this chapter opens, let's all just think about this wild possibilities that lie ahead, and be part of the change. How will you individually, how will your league, your community show up for social justice? How will we elevate the voices of those coming after us? How will we step out of the way, provide space, as you said, Virginia? As a white woman, how do I decenter my narrative, recognizing the limitations that my perspective brings to the table? The challenge is not only, I think, today to ask yourself that question. I think probably everybody here has been asking themselves that, but sit with those questions. And as Virginia said, sit in that discomfort, ability to really go in places that you haven't been before. Ask yourself hard questions, but go the next step. And that's the challenge today, I think. Play these out in the organizations you volunteer with, around the family dinner table, at your workplace, and ask them in service to the League of Women Voters, so that the League will be protecting, uplifting, redefining our democracy for the next century, just as we have for the last 100 years. Thank you all so much for joining us. And I send you off to the presidential debate, activated, inspired, involved, and good night. Thank you.